Hey.
Hey.
So we're recording this episode in a motel of questionable quality in Dallas, Texas. And we realized that this is the first time that either of us have been outside of the airport in Dallas.
That's true. I've been here
Despite-
twice before. Once in 2015 and
once on this
trip. Yeah.
Yeah, and same. I passed through Dallas airport changing on my way to Orlando this trip, but then I also landed in Dallas. No, I lie. Oh my goodness.
You're lying.
So much. I just spill
So,
nothing
like
but
this-
falsities out of my
you've-
mouth.
Yeah, you've made this podcast into a unreliable narrator.
Bed of thieves and hooligans.
Like, how are we supposed to intro this episode now?
I don't know. I just realized that I landed in Houston and changed last time I came.
Yeah.
Houston and Dallas are not the same place. I'm just teaching all of the Americans out there a little bit of geography because
Oh my God.
I've been told.
Let's
don't
just talk
get-
about your cloud, Michael.
Okay, onwards. Your cloud. On Scarlett's map, your cloud stretches all the way from Houston, where I did land and
That's
change
right.
planes, all the way up to Philadelphia. It's quite a long drive for your cloud. We, however, only touched on it at the beginning and the end. Bailey and Teague from Houston on their drive to New Orleans, and then that last little stretch into Philly as we drove from DC.
Yeah, it was amazing.
But this is an interesting song because I feel like it's quite polarizing among the fandom.
Big time.
A lot of people either find it utterly brilliant and connect with it really, really deeply, or just think it's terribly boring. And so,
Under-fucking rated.
yes, absolutely.
For the record, both you and I fall into the former category, but we think it's a brilliant and beautiful piece of music and a fantastic song.
Yes, I have a mixed relationship with it, but I see its power and strength, and I can't wait to unpack it. And I also can't wait to share with you some thoughts that other fans have had, because we got to interview two people who shared their thoughts on Your Cloud. Alexander Leisure Small and Harinan Jaya, also known as Aaron Hefele, who lives
Voice for Hefele?
Voice for Hefele. Oh my god, that's brilliant.
That's
Who
all yours,
just-
Aaron, sweetie.
Yeah, all yours.
Harinan, you take that one.
Who just really, both of them broadened my understanding and appreciation of it so deeply, and so I can't wait to share those with you a bit later in this episode.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Michael Erb.
And I'm Bailey Turner,
Welcome to Michael's Walk.
the podcast.
Michael's Walk is a road trip, a search for something. Spoilers! It's myself, and it was inside all along.
If only it were that simple.
Driven by Tori Amos's album, Scarlett's Walk, I'm recreating the journey Scarlett took in its 20th anniversary year,
I'll also be there,
with the loving and patient
always patient.
support of Bailey and Teague Lee, 3 trans queers set out across America
That's 33 states in 55 days.
to connect with the songs, the land that inspired them, and the fans inspired by the songs. We'll talk music, travel, healing, and hope as we ask the questions: how do I heal from 15 years of coercive control and manipulation?
And what role does the music we listen to play in our own relationship narratives?
We've self-produced this podcast and trip.
You can support us via GoFundMe.
For the full story, head to michaelerb.net.
So what does the song mean for you, Michael?
What does it mean to me? When I was in the thick of it, as they were, thick in the woods, lost in the woods. I'm going to stop searching for metaphors and similes. I really saw this as a song about what's the point of trying to separate two things that have become one, and I was interpreting that as me and my partner had forged a relationship, and so therefore the separation of our two lives combined was a fruitless enterprise. And initially that was a very, very beautiful and heartwarming and lovely sentiment that I really lent into. And then as time wore on, it very much became a prison of itself almost, because I started to lose sight of the potential of separating until I honestly believed that there was no life other than this one that I had built with this person. And so I had no choice but to admit that we were now one thing that couldn't be separated.
Yeah, right.
So that was really painful. And then after the breakup, I started to see it more as, well, when Tori talks about this song in her notes, she references how you can't separate the Native Americans from their land just by removing them from it. You can't remove your history from yourself just by putting it behind you, or forcibly separating people from homes and all of this sort of thing. And so now I more relate this to myself and my former self, in that just because I went through all of that doesn't mean I'm separated from who I am and my own spiritual home inside myself, even though I felt so removed from that for such a long time.
Yeah.
But it's quite different for you, isn't it?
It is a different... I always loved this song because I thought lyrically it's one of the most beautiful songs on the record. Even just from that first line, you know, where the river crosses the lake, the enunciation on the consonants, and I loved the idea that you could sort of see it as, is it a river named the River Cross, or is it kind of a faltering that was happening as she sort of said, well, where the river crosses the lake, you know, like there's a sort of, there's something in there that really caught me, particularly when a few, you know, now nearly 4 years ago, my brother was dying. And I think I've sort of mentioned Kale's death a number of times, and I just want to reassure that my brother died in a very tragic car accident. Because he was so young, a lot of people assume that he may have taken his own life or died of some sort of drug-based situation, but he was in a car accident. And effectively, we had a week with him while we determined what the damage of that accident would be. And at the end of that week, it was determined that, you know, he was not going to be fit to live any further. He was not in a condition for living, so we had to let him go and spend that time. And so I feel really blessed that we had that time with him. But the nature of things were that we were, as a family, my sister was in Germany at the time and had to fly back on her own, and I was about to re-put on my show. I was about to do Fringe again, and my parents were due to travel. You know, it was kind of a whole... Our family kind of came together in this week, and it was this kind of Groundhog Day where we would wake up and we would all shower, and it was like climbing a mountain to get to hospital and do what was required to be done there and spend the day and kind of, you know, come in and out and work out what we're doing. And I remember this song kind of played at one point, or I thought of it in the shower while I was getting ready to go to hospital. It kind of became my touchstone song that I used to listen to every morning and just kind of sit in the shower and, to be honest, you know, cry a fair bit. And because it was that sense of understanding that with every passing day, it became more and more likely that he would die and that he wasn't going to be all right and he wasn't going to wake up. And so separating myself from him and understanding who I was as a person without him, you know, at this time, bear in mind that I was his older brother, and that's how I identified. And it was, and I'd spent, you know, he's 8 years my junior, so I'd spent a lot of my life characterizing my actions in deference to or in relationship with him. So to sort of go, well, who am I if I don't have you know, my younger brother, like, you know, what does that mean for me, and what does that mean for my duty on this earth and my responsibilities? And that sort of, where the river crosses the lake, was even just that moment of like, there's a grief there, like when you're sort of, where she's, to me, that's how it starts for me, is this kind of like, she's saying something and then she has to kind of, it hits her and she has to hold it and then finish the line. And that's how it kind of, that was basically my meter for the entire, you know, few bits of time that it was happening. Yeah, that song is very connected to my relationship with Kao, and my relationship to losing him, and what it meant to become someone who, you know, was that hole that he left in my life. And it's that, you know, what do you do now? You know, how do you go forward without that person who really made you who you are?
Yeah, well, I guess that's the thing with music, isn't it? You really sort of approach it from your own experience and your own understanding of the world, and so that's why we all take different things from it at different times in our lives.
Yeah, I really like the way that you know, Tori talks about her songs and she calls them her girls, or she calls them girls, and kind of gives them this really wonderful evolutionary personification. And I love seeing the songs that way, and I think about them in the context, and it really is like, you know, I really did feel like she was sat there on the edge of the bathtub while I was in the shower, just kind of coaxing me to have enough strength to get out of the shower and go to hospital and be there for my family and support them to make, you know, the hardest decisions we'd ever had to make. She really was there as a very clear being for me. And that's, you know, where we come to this point about, and you and I talk about this a lot, it kind of, it baffles me when the Tory community sees any kind of value in saying a song is shit, or saying a song is boring, or not wanting a song, or, you know, if she plays it live, I'm walking out, or, you know, like all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that song, you know, Ribbons Undone may have saved someone's life, and you're going on the internet and saying that it's a terrible, objectively terrible song, and you have no idea, which is ironic, because there are songs that for you are critical to your health and your happiness and your relationships. So you know how important these songs can be to you, and yet you want to talk smack about other ones, and therefore, you know, what that song has meant to a lot of other people. That's why I just can't participate in this song sucks, or that album was crap, or whatever. And yeah, you know, I think Your Cloud gets a lot of flack for being a bit of a snore fest, but I'd urge you to reconsider the way that you speak about Tori's discography, because you never know what those songs can mean to somebody else.
And just because something's a different speed doesn't mean it's not worthwhile.
Well, or that it doesn't reach you. You know, just because it doesn't kind of, just because you don't connect doesn't mean it's garbage. You know,
I mean, some people would probably try and say the same of like Bells for her, but like, I think like just because it's slower, you know, but it has. But there's so many of us out there that like draw on that for so many reasons.
Absolutely.
And just because it's in the first half of her discography, it seems to be, you know, allowed more leeway than, I don't know what I'm saying anymore.
Well, the point is, just leave Tori's songs alone, okay? Leave Tori's songs alone. The other important thing to note that when we were planning this episode, we talked about how, being Australian, this song had a real connection to our history of the stolen generation, which is the forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families, and bringing those children into white schools and into white families in the hopes that they would adapt into white culture, before, you know, have relationships and have children with white people, and therefore slowly sort of remove. Yeah, it was eugenics. You know, like cultural, you know, whitewashing of like slowly remove, you know, and vile, disgusting practice. But this song really kind of connected with that as we were reading about Tori's notes. You know, and I know that, you know, stolen generations have happened to pretty much every, you know, Indigenous culture, if not, you know, the only reason I say almost every is because I can't say for sure, but I cannot imagine that that's not happening in a colonized sort of in a colonized situation. But yeah, you know, sort of very famous stories that kind of came out of Australia. If you've seen the movie Rabbit Proof Fence, you'll sort of be aware, like this, it was quite common for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to escape the missions and schools that they were sent to and find their way home, and walking for days and weeks and just continuing to escape and make their way back to their country, or their part. We say country as a means to talk about the part of Australia that this kind of has that affiliation for us as we're thinking about things as well. Especially being that it's now NAIDOC week.
Yes.
By the way, if you don't know what that is. Oh God, my brain is addled and I can't remember. Oh God, please edit out the fact that I cannot recall. No, don't edit it out. I should be absolutely ashamed. But it is a week. Actually, she's become a month this year.
Oh, brilliant.
So it's now NAIDOC month, which is a recognition of Indigenous culture and Indigenous rights to land and Indigenous rights to sovereignty in Australia. So happy NAIDOC month.
Yes. I love how this ties in with a little note that Tori wrote in the liner notes about Scarlett and her journey. And when she arrives in Philadelphia, the quote is, "She arrives in Philadelphia where she sees the Liberty Bell and observes that it is cracked."
To put it so simply.
Yeah. It's like, whose liberty? Like, what liberty is this supposed to represent, and why was it so easily cracked? And why do we now celebrate cracked liberty?
Yeah, literally. Well, it's the notion that we cast this sort of monument to liberty in a country where it does not exist, and it's as clear as day that the liberty is flawed, that there's a crack in it, and we're all just going to pretend that doesn't exist, and that the liberty is therefore damaged,
people. Yeah, it's flawed from the outset.
Mm-hmm. We didn't see the Liberty Bell.
Or observe that it was cracked ourselves.
Although we were told that the reason it's cracked is that it was made too brittle.
Yes.
It wasn't made to withstand the travel that it had to do.
And that it's also the second Liberty Bell, the first one also cracked.
I mean, third time's a charm, Philadelphia. Good thing you can make cream cheese.
And they're going to go to Philly and they're going to see where the cream cheese is made.
I want to see where they make the light cream cheese.
When we were in Cape Cod, I educated Bailey and made her watch Best in Show, which is one of my favourite films, and it was glorious.
We had a few really great memories in both Houston and Philadelphia. Houston, so Teague and I drove from San Antonio to Houston, and it was a pretty interesting day. It was the first time we really encountered really bad traffic, and we'd both found San Antonio pretty overwhelming because we went to see the Alamo. So by the time we got to Houston, we were feeling a whole bunch of things, but Michael had charged us from their hotel room to find a sangria somewhere because we were traveling all along the Sweet Sangria line en route from San Antonio to Houston. Although we didn't do too much of the drive of the map, we kind of got there more directly. Basically, we got to Houston and we went to, we found there was a gay bar called Michael's Outpost.
And as I was stuck in
Facepalm
Mission Control Facepalm Springs.
It just was perfect, Michael's Outpost. So we were so optimistic that we would manage to find a sangria there, but we did not. So we instead had a beer in this empty, kitschy or gay piano bar, and then drove off to another place that I can't remember the name of. It was like Dishy something. It was also empty, and we went in and we said, "Oh look, we're looking for sangria," and the bar manager told us that they didn't actually do them anymore. We'd seen them on the menu on the website. We said, "Oh, we want a sangria." "Oh, we don't do them. That's the summer menu. We're now in." "No, that's the something menu, and now we're in the summer menu." We're like, "Oh, you gotta be kidding me!" And we clearly looked a bit deflated and a bit like, "Oh no, now what are we gonna do?" And he basically went, "Look, does it have to be a sangria?" And we said, "Yeah, it does." And he went, "Look, I can't make sangria because it's gonna take too long, but I can make a sangria-esque cocktail for you." And so we went, that'll have to do. because we were running out of time into the evening before we were due at Teague's brother's house. Teague's cousin's house. And so this guy made this delicious drink that was super sangria-esque. And Teague took a chance on white sangria. Teague had never had white sangria before, but I recommended that. And it was friggin' delicious. And this bartender named James just basically told us about his life story of being, he was a pro footballer who got sent to a college, but due to not being willing to admit that he was getting injured because he was so competitive, he basically damaged himself beyond the ability to play, couldn't hold the grades to keep the scholarship, so went to another school, and then it was kind of a similar situation. So he became a mixologist and just sort of started bartending. And he told us this great story about how he was doing security, and basically it didn't matter, you worked from whatever it was, 9 till 3 in the morning. It didn't matter what happened, whether there was huge bar brawls or no one in all night. It was $45 for the whole night.
What the?
Yeah, $45 a night to work security. And obviously it's terrible bloody money, and you can't get tips as security. So eventually one of his friends got him into behind the bar, and he worked his way up. And I'll say this, he was wonderful but very big black man, and he was like, you don't see a lot of men my size behind the bar because there's not a lot of room, and you can't. And I would go for jobs, and they would say, look, you're not going to fit behind the bar. Fat phobia rides again. But what he used to do was he would go into, and obviously being black as well, whether he had, whether that would have been better to his opportunities. So he would go into bars and he would ask to speak to the manager, and it would be like a Friday night, and he would say, give me a shot behind the bar I will outsell or whatever your best bartender tonight. If I do, then I get to keep my tips. If I don't, then I don't get paid a thing. And it was there was only one night out of weeks I was doing this that I didn't take my tips home, which is more than I would have earned as a bartender, more than I would have earned as a security anyway.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how he got really good, and so it was just this awesome dude. And then we told him a bit of our story, and he was just amazing. And then we realized we had to go, and he said, your drinks are on the house. Good luck. And have a great time. So shout out to James in Houston. We just going to be one of those standout characters that we got to meet along the road.
Fantastic. And that's my first time hearing that story, because they were saving it up for the podcast.
That's right. But we also had a great time in Philly, didn't we?
Yeah, Philly was fantastic, even though we literally just stopped there for lunch and made one single stop. But we went to...
We made 2 stops, actually. We stopped for pepper spray.
Oh, this is true.
We bought pepper spray in Philly.
We did buy pepper spray. But before then, we stopped at Giovanni's Room, which is a fantastic bookshop. It's the oldest queer bookshop in America, and was just such a wonderful experience. I did what I love to do when I'm traveling, and I asked the staff for recommendations, and they're like, well, what do you like? And I'm like, that's not what this is about. This is what I'm doing. This is kind of what I like to read, but I'm actually after your personal favorites. And so I ended up buying 3 poetry collections from that staff member, because one of them just had the best title ever. It was called You Think This Is a Date? Apocalypse Poems.
Just very on the nose for our friendship.
Yeah. And there was another one that was recommended that was it's getting a bit of buzz at the moment. The title of it has gone from my brain, but I turn over to the back and the blurb says something along the lines of, how can you reckon with your past when you're still living through the trauma, or something like that. It basically was like, you need to read this collection.
I was going to say, what prompted you to buy? What made you think that would be valuable?
And then the third one was the staff member saying, This one is not showy or like contemporary. In fact, it's been around for decades, and it's just my personal favorite. I absolutely love it. And I look at the publication date and it was 2002, and I'm like, well, we're literally doing a 2-month trip around some 2002 poetry. So here we are. I'll buy that one too. So I'm yet to get into them, but I've picked up some more poetry collections along the way, and I'm just sort of dipping in and out when I have the time.
Yeah, I realise I'm probably going to have to read a fair bit, read a whole bunch of these. We'll have to have a bit of a book club and just swap books.
I read one from a different collection on the plane today, the plane to Dallas, and the poem was called Summer Somewhere, and it was effectively all about a gay black man coming to terms with how black people are killed by the police and how gayness plays into that. And you get it from multiple perspectives, but the majority of the poem is from the black boy who is dead and the peace that he has found in death because no one can touch him now. And it was so powerful, and yeah, there was a lot to take from it.
Wow.
And then I wrote my own little poem on the plane that I shared on Insta Stories. Here's the interview we did with Alexander Leger-Small. We touched on a few different Scarlet songs, but here's his thoughts on Your Cloud. Hey, Alex, or is it Alexander?
Alexander, if you please.
Always. I've just been hearing a few Alexes around the house, and so I'm not sure.
So my husband Matthew and I, when we met, we both went by shortened versions of our names. And then as we grew older and became professionals and I started publishing as a writer, I wanted to use my full name. And then I just realized I really like my name.
Excellent. Because you've always been Alexander in my head, and so hearing people call you Alex, I'm like, that sounds foreign to me.
It sounds weird to me too.
I've always been Michael, no abbreviations of Michael.
Mm-hmm.
It's not me. Thank you for joining us on Michael's Vlog.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining us at our home.
Thank you for having us. Incredible hosts. Oh my God. It's just been such a delight to be here.
Well, thank you.
In gorgeous Holyoke, Massachusetts. Yeah, my goodness. What a beautiful spot and a beautiful house you have.
Thank you.
And a gorgeous dopey dog.
You're saying all the right things to me right now. You're rubbing all of my pleasure receptors.
Well, let's not talk too much about rubbing pleasure receptors because I'll get carried away.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. So, yeah, tell me about your relationship with Tori and Scarlet's Walk.
Sure. So, my relationship with Tori, we can say, is something like that of an aunt that has been present through my childhood into adulthood and was a mother and a best friend and a sister and an enemy at times. And
oh yeah, there's all these moments where it's Tori, how could you?
Yeah, and also I definitely went through a period of my life where I had to, it wasn't very long, but I had to be like, I don't need Tori anymore. I need to be a person without her. And then I realized that she is integral to who I am. So Scarlet as an album was the first album that was released when I was an adult. So I was in my freshman year in college, and I traveled alone to see the tour for the first time, and I was living on my own for the first time, and I got to create a really different relationship. Both my mom and my sister are fans as well, so previous to that, when an album would come out, it would be a group experience in a lot of ways, and even going to see shows, I would go with my mom or my sister or both. And Scarlet itself feels like an album of growing up to some extent, or realizing that you're not the person that you thought you were, or you're not in the country that you thought you were. And so I think it rang really true for me as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old boy, queer boy who was, and I had moved away from home for college. I was living in Chicago, and I had grown up on the East Coast of Massachusetts and Virginia. So I was seeing the country in a new way, and I was finding myself in somebody else's paradise in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there a particular track that speaks to you, or tracks?
Well, before we started recording, I told you too, and I'm going to change my mind.
Oh, good. Excellent. I love when something strikes you as, no, follow me instead.
Yes, and that's Your Cloud.
Oh, yeah.
And as much as I loved the album when I received it, at that point in my life, I was very tuned into Tori's ballads and her piano as an instrument of beauty, and had a harder time with songs like Professional Widow or She's Your Cocaine that were too rough. And Your Cloud was a really soft moment on that album. And since that time, I've come to understand that maybe it had different meaning for Tori in writing it, but the way I heard it then and still tend to hear it now is a partner, an intimate argument between partners, and one of them just saying, how could we be anything but the same thing? How could the river and the lake separate where they cross, because they're both the same body at that point? And as a young queer man, I wanted to be in love desperately, and I wanted to feel those things. And now, as an older queer man who has been with my partner for 18 years, I do not know how to separate. And I don't know where I end and where he begins very often. And since growing older, I can see, and I've dealt with the detrimental side of that and the codependent side of that, and the part that is afraid to be separate from the person that you love and the person that you have built an identity and life around. And I think Your Cloud holds that as well in a lot of ways. And still, though, when I come back to it now, it's a beautiful love song to me.
It's interesting because it was very much a love song to me in my past relationship. And it's funny because was it yesterday morning? Yes, yesterday morning interviewed Harinan about Your Cloud.
Really?
Because for him, it's his all-time favorite Tori track.
Wow.
And his insights, you'll have to look forward to the episode.
I certainly will.
His insights just blew me. Like, I was astounded. And when I got off the Zoom, I just had to sit and be still for myself, like, for a while, because he's a yoga teacher, and like, he sees all of these yoga principles playing out through the song. It was just an incredible discussion. Anyway, so I feel like I've been steeping a lot in Your Cloud recently. But when I was in my relationship, I very much saw it as but we're together, so how could we possibly separate? And then that became a trap. That became well, we can't separate, so, like, why should we even try? And now, looking back, it's more of a, you can't separate me from who I was before the relationship. And, like, yes, I've gone through those transfigurations of rain, like, lake to cloud to rain to river. Like, it's the big circle of the life cycle of water. But I'm still myself despite all of those forms.
Yes. I like that
Yeah.
quite a bit. And while you were talking, it struck me in the lyrics, it's not if the rain has a fight with itself or if the rain chooses to leave itself. It has to.
Yeah.
It's an imperative moment, and the rain doesn't, it's not it doesn't want to, but sometimes things have to happen.
Yeah. Whew, what a song.
Yeah.
I mean, but you could say that about every song
That's
on
true.
this album in particular, in my opinion. And yeah, how about advice for...
Well,
what would you advise?
It's interesting because I know what I sort of was going to say, but in the time since we planned this episode, I think I actually have some different advice
go for it.
Virginia. And my advice really is, and it might seem really odd, and it always seems so counterintuitive, but when it comes to relationships, and almost anything really, having an exit strategy is actually a really valuable thing. I remember getting this advice when I started a job. I was about 23 and I just moved to Melbourne, and I got into this gig and I thought it was great. And someone who was very precious to the company was leaving at the time, and I sort of ended up trying to make friends with him even though he was leaving the company, and we ended up having this like coffee, and he went, always have an exit strategy. That's the best advice I can give you. Always have a series of conditions under which you would no longer be in the situation that you're in. Like, you would no longer work for this organization if this. You would no longer be in this relationship if that. You would no longer deal with this behavior by this friend if this. And it's kind of sat in my psyche since then, and I think it has saved me in a lot of circumstances. And we were having this conversation about, speaking to your point earlier about trying to separate from someone you've been with and who is sort of ingrained and ingrown into your life, over the course of 15 years, and how do you separate that? You kind of want to have some kind of exit strategy, and you want to have some sort of cognizance of what it would mean to unstitch things like bank accounts and living arrangements and family, relationships and, custody agreements, if that's the case. There's this idea that while we're romantic and when we're in a happy place, that we shouldn't kind of talk about separating. But I feel like that's the best time. It's that thing, like, go to the doctor when you're healthy. Don't wait until you're sick. Set up these really good strategies when you love each other, so that it's kind of more Murphy's Law. Like, if you have them in place, then you're never going to need them. And if you have them in place, at whatever point you have an argument, or you have a disagreement, or you have a concern, you've already got a plan. And this is what I teach as a consent educator. We actually tell people, here's a process to go through if something goes wrong on site. And what that means is, because everyone knows, if you approach someone and challenge their behavior, they're going to know what process you're following. They don't think you're taking a personal vendetta out against them. This is a process that everyone has the same steps for, and everyone knows the steps are there to be followed, and they know what steps to take if those steps don't work. This is what we teach, from a consent education perspective, and I think it has a great application in relationships. If we fight, how are we going to manage that? If we're poly and we decide, we're having this conversation with someone else on the tour back in San Diego. They were sort of just starting their poly journey, and it was like, well, we're just not allowed to fall in love with, whoever it is that we're talking to. And I went, well, that's nonsense. Like, it's very, what happens then if you do? Because you can't just ignore that, and you can't lie about it. You actually need to, it's a more productive conversation to say, okay, let's hypothetically say that this might happen. I don't think it will. I've got no interest in anyone but you. But if this happens, what do we then do to manage it?
Yeah.
Because it's not a sort of, well, if I fall in love with someone, then I must be in love with them and pursue a relationship with them. I don't want that. So if I fall in love with them, how am I going to make sure that I don't go down that road, that we get reassurance and we have an openness? So it's, setting up, I suppose my advice for your cloud and my advice for Virginia is, think about those things and have those plans in place. So then when things go wrong, you don't have to kind of invent a way to deal with them. You've already got one existing.
And further to that, if you do need to separate from someone, regardless of how long you've been together, things will sort themselves out. Like, I know it seems like it's impossible to imagine a life without this person. But if you're that unhappy that you need to get out, then just trust that your life will unfold from here in its own way. you don't have to have all of the answers. You don't need to know where you'll end up living necessarily. You don't need to wonder which of your friends will choose which of the partner, like which of the couple after the breakup. And potentially, if they choose the other person, then maybe they weren't worth keeping around in the first place.
Or maybe they'll have their own journey to discover with that person, and the friendship that you have may forge itself again later.
Yeah, so just don't let those unknowns keep you somewhere.
Absolutely not.
That. But I guess my advice ties in with that. I've come to really lean on the lyric, "Indigo is his own, blue always knew this," just to sort of mean that you're always your own thing. Like you're always your own, regardless of how together you become. You're still your one person.
Yeah.
Which also leads directly into one of my song swap recommendations. Alanis Morissette's "Not the Doctor," where she sings, "I believe that 1 and 1 make 2." And sometimes I needed that as I'm not half a person that needs another half a person to make me a whole. I am a one person. And then, yes, two people together, but then two people are also two individuals.
Absolutely.
And so that's okay. You can be two and still be one.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, before I get into my song, so I do actually want to mention the piece of advice because it does pertain. You were saying, what one of your favorite lyrics in the song, and my favorite moment in the song. I know I talked about that sort of first lyric, but my favorite part of the song is in the beginning of verse 2, when it sort of says, "Oh, how light can play and form a ring," and then there's the undercurrent of like, I found a thrill. And to me, I love that part because it reminds me of how much joy I was able to find in losing my brother. It brought up so many great memories and so many good connections, and I ended up like seeing someone very briefly over that time as well, and I was able to kind of appreciate life in a very different way the closer in proximity I became to death. And so what that kind of brought around for me was the greatest power that we have is forgiveness. And it's not to say that we need to allow people to stay in our life, but it is about that's something that we need to kind of do, is to forgive people and to forgive ourselves for the parts that we played, and forgive that person for doing what they did, even if it was good things, and it makes the whole situation harder. Forgiveness is a really important part of any process, and it's in when we talk about abuse and queerness, it's in any abuser's interest to make you believe that without you they'd become nothing, or they'd die, or they would they run out. And that's even more when we talk about queer relationship violence, that's even more of an alarm, because that's actually even more accurate. Queer people do struggle with employment, and we talk about trans people in particular, struggling with employment, struggling with housing, struggling with addiction and substance misuse. And so it can be very tempting to stay, because it's a very real possibility that without your input that person would fall apart. The thing is, you can't sort of lend your entire self over, we're talking about two becoming one. It's one thing, and we talked about this, the Venn diagram. It's, we talked about, when that person you don't have any of your own circle, you're completely consumed. But I think what's worth knowing is that most people are pretty industrious, and it's very easy for that person to believe they wouldn't be able to survive without you, and they don't even have to consider the prospect, and when they're sort of sedated by the knowledge that you won't leave them, and therefore they don't need to push very hard on these things. People have a remarkable survival skill, and I know that it's been very strange for me and for people I know when, it's that, if I don't do something, then, that person will suffer. and then eventually, pushed to breaking point, you do separate, and somehow they still manage to be okay.
Yeah.
They still manage to figure out their job and their housing situation, and a couple of years later, somehow they're in a relationship, and it's all, so.
Yeah, that's particularly relevant to me, where my ex was unemployed for 8 years and just didn't seem to be able, refused to even get government benefits because of pride and his own shame. And then literally 3 days after I broke up with him, he's like, I applied for the dole, as if that was enough to convince me to take him back. And it's like, well, no, you could have done that a decade ago and be contributing to this relationship, but you chose to live off my very meager income and put us through a lot harder times than we needed to be, simply for your own pride. And then I got lots of don't leave me, you're my last person. And 2 years after I broke up with him, he sends me an email inviting me to his wedding, which
That's it.
I'm not entirely sure the wedding was real, but anyway, that's what the email said.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, we get a lot out of the idea that these people couldn't survive without us, but the concern that we need to have is whether we can survive with them. Because whether they survive without us actually has nothing to do with us. It's absolutely not in our control.
Absolutely.
And often, it's that notion we teach people how to treat us. If that person believes that we'll just continue to provide, then I'm sure their concern is very real. But once they're put in that position, people have a way of figuring things out, and it doesn't matter whether they do or they don't. None of those things is your fault. Your only responsibility is to your own mental well-being and protecting your safety and your security and your sanity.
Absolutely. And before we get into Bailey's song suggestions, here's the incredible interview with Harinan. So here I am chatting with Harinam, who lives in Florida, and we connected through, you filled out the form that I put out into the world about this project. And I was particularly keen to talk to you for the podcast when you mentioned to me that Your Cloud is your all-time favorite Tory song. And so I would just love to hear about what Your Cloud means to you.
Yeah. I love Tori. I love her music, love her lyrics. There's so much. Scarlet's Walk was an impactful album for me. And out of the entire album, Your Cloud just always resonated with my own heart. And I almost felt like it's evolved with me over time, right? The lyrics to me are incredibly deep. And I felt like it evolved with me in a way. Like the way I interpreted the meaning, in 2002 or 2005 or 2010 and where we are today in 2022, it's evolved with me. And for that reason, it just has always stood out as a favorite in my heart.
That's fantastic. I have to say that my relationship with the song has also evolved over time. I'll probably go into it in a lot more detail in the Your Cloud episode that this will be a part of. But just across the Scarlet album in general, on this trip, I'm finding new discoveries in the lyrics all the time. And this is my most listened to Tory album for 20 years. And I'm still making discoveries. It's such an incredible album.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you there.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the progression of what it has meant for you then.
Sure. In the early 20s, I was exploring my sexuality. I knew I was gay, trying to live the life, figuring out who I was. burdened with a lot of heaviness in my heart, right? Not knowing who I was and lacking self-worth, right, was a heavy theme in those years. And so I felt like this song was almost reflecting in the early years who I was, right? From the color blue to talking about like journaling things. I'm like, oh, I felt like Tori was like peeling the curtain away and like writing about me in a sense, right? And I felt like, she's talking about, I always thought of it almost as a breakup anthem in a sense, right? Because there's talking about coming together and separating and what that all means. I took it very literally, and I related that to like, experiences of just relationships and interaction in the gay world, right? And as it evolved for me, and as I reflect on the lyrics today, I look at it from a more yogic point of view. And to me, it's a much deeper song in the sense that it really is talking about energy. Talking about, to me, like in yogic philosophy, there is no difference between you and I. We are the same, right? There's like sun and moon. It's the tantra, right? Like there is the ego of me and the ego of you, but then there's also the tantric dissolve of us. And I feel like Tori's dancing through that in a sense, right? And I also think that in a sense, like Tori leans and repeats in the song. I'm looking at the lyrics here, like, I'm going to stay right here and I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to stay right here and I'm going to stay with this. And to me, that's addressing your trauma and sitting in it for a moment, right? Like sitting in the things that you've experienced, and maybe even healing them, right? Because when we bounce out of those things and don't really feel them, they linger, right? It's like a shadow.
Yeah.
But when you sit with it, it can become real, and you can work through that, right? So I know that's a little long-winded answer, but
no, that's the point. I want as long-winded as you want to give me.
Yeah. I guess the other thing that I would say is that in yoga, we talk about energy, right? And the divine feminine form is female, right? And all action, all creation occurs through the female movement, right? We're born from women, we come out of the female body and all of that, right? And when we're taught about that in yoga, in the deeper teachings, we're taught that, the female energy is like an arrow, right? And when we direct it and when it goes, there's no stopping it. So as I've reflected on these lyrics over the years and with a deeper yogic understanding, Tori's talking a lot about the energy coming off my body and off this person's body and into her heart and how it transcends. And to me, it's all about energy, right? It's a very, to me, tantric and very energetic, spiritual message that she's conveying, like, how do we, it's like she's coming in and out of this separation between you and I, and then the merge of the two, and what that means, and how do, her lyrics, if the rain has to separate itself, does it say pick out your cloud? Like, when is that conscious, right? Like, when does the raindrop say it's time, I'm going to come from this cloud? It doesn't, right? Does it? Yeah. I don't know. It's such a deep concept.
Yeah. And like, because once the rain is evaporated, it becomes the cloud. So
returns to source, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That feminine energy as an arrow image has just really floored me.
Yeah. Like in yoga, they tell us, as we do spiritual practice, our body fills with this divine feminine energy, kundalini rising, right? The feminine energy builds. It's the ancient teachings. And it is our job to direct that energy, right? To say, I'm going to do a thing, and then put our energy behind it, and then it happens, right? Like going on a trip around the world and writing a book. Like, you build an energy, and then you put that energy behind it, and then and then it goes, right?
Yes, yes.
That's how the divine feminine works. And then, you know, there's like blessings within it because it almost does itself, right? Like when you align yourself with that energy, it's just so present. It's just so there.
Yeah. But also for me, like it really struck home because in my early 20s, when I was seeing this as a love song and as a reason to not leave a very poor relationship, like even the line you mentioned before, I'm going to stay right here, I'm going to stay with this, that was literally saying to me, you know, what are you trying to separate? You need to stay here with this relationship.
Yeah.
And but around that time in my early 20s, I turned the lyrics of this into a sort of little comic strip, like a mini graphic novel in a way. And one of the images with that line that runs off the map of your body right through my heart, the image that I drew was a woman lying back where her sort of the curve of her knee and leg turns into a mountain range landscape, and it is an arrow that shoots right up through her heart, and like arrows play into the entire, like I basically have drawn a whole lot of arrows in direction. Anyway, I feel like maybe I'll include it in the episode show notes so people can look at my really poorly drawn early 20s comic book of Your Cloud.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's the imagery just really sprang back into my mind when you were describing that. Sorry to railroad.
No, it's good. I love that. I love that. It really it reaffirms, right? It's a reaffirming synchronicity that, I mean, this is the first time we're discussing this, and to consider that like the arrow presents, right?
Yeah.
That line and the movement through, like we can get that image through her lyric is really like there's something there behind it.
Yeah. Goodness, I I feel a bit flawed. Anyway, what else? Do you have anything else to offer about the song?
Yeah, you know, I'm reflecting on the lyrics. There's a line. There's a line about indigo.
Is his own blue always knew this?
Yeah, and to me, as I've grown, you know, indigo in his own blue always knew this. Like, it's a timelessness, right? That whole piece, right? Who we were isn't lost before we were us. Indigo in his own blue always knew this. It's like deep inside ourselves, like at the surface, like blue is always my favorite color. And I was like, oh, Tori wrote this about me, right? Like, you know, my young gay self really felt, you know, a connection to that. Yet, as I reflect on that now, it's sort of like my spirit, my soul has always been the same, right? Like there is no division from that. Like it's a timelessness of who my spirit and who your spirit and who are, you know, like there's this ongoing thread of who we are that continues through time. And that's what that means to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because one of the things that I've been struggling with in the wake of the relationship I got out of is trying to identify who I was before it and how much that matters. And for a couple of years, the first few years after the breakup, I was fixated on going back to who I was before the relationship.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was a 7 to 18-year-old like I wasn't fully formed. Like there is no going back. But at the same time, I haven't lost who that person was. I've just grown with these experiences. So yeah, this is one of the things, like sort of constructing my sense of self outside of what was a very codependent 15-year relationship.
Yeah.
It's like I'm now finding this song to be really reassuring that, like, me as a individual and a centered self has always been there. Like, it was there before, and that you can't erase it just because you go through those things. I may have lost it along the way there for a bit, but yeah, Indigo is his own.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, it's always there. It's
Yeah.
like the core of your spirit is always there. Even if you get lost along the journey, like once you get the bullshit out of the way, you're like, oh, I'm here. You know, your unique, special, individual vibration is always there. And that was meaningful to me, like, because it meant that I was something, right?
Absolutely.
Not just a scientific mishap, right? Like there's a deepness to this experience, and to yours and to every person, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I felt like lyrically and just musically speaking, the melodies are sort of evolving, right? It's almost like a trancy, it's like you're driving through the mountains a little bit, right? Or curving roads, because you can get this sense of meandering through the experience, right?
I like imagining drifting down a river with this one, and like every now and then it'll speed up as the river narrows, but then it'll wide out and slow down, and like it has a very liquid feel to it to me.
Yeah, I feel that for sure. There's a flow. There's definitely a flow that you can feel. One other thing that I would expound on is, and this is just my own unique experience, right? And it kicks off with that initial lyric, where the river crosses the lake, where the words jump off my pen into your pages. There's a blending, there's a separation and a joining, right? There's a merging happening is what Tori's talking about there. And to me, it was very literal in my earlier years when the song was new, right? I could see myself journaling as I did, and how, those experiences were replaying and manifesting in the physical form. Like, I just really was stuck in the moment of it, in a traumatic kind of not healthy relationship, right? Codependent, all that thing, right? And now, as I reflect on this song in the later years, it makes me think of my relationship with my guru, in the sense that, like, my guru Majaya Sati Bhagavati her whole teaching was about the river, right? The river of life, and how it's a stream of consciousness from the feminine form, and the river is there through all time, right? You can tap into that flow, you can feel it. And to me, it made me think of almost myself being the lake and the river coming in, right? It's like a lake is still, but a river brings flow, right? It made me think of that merging with something greater, something more powerful than what is. And Tori's asking, do you think just like that you can divide this? You as yours, me as mine, two before we were us. Like, to me, it's saying once it's merged, we've connected, our alchemy has changed. We've dissolved into each other now. Like, that can't be done, right? Undone. No matter where the river goes or what the path means, like, we merged in that moment, and that has caused that alchemy change. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because the other thing that I'm grappling with is that for a while I was too fixated on the idea of like erasing what I've been through, and now I'm trying to sit with the fact that there is no erasing it, but there is growth of it. Like, I can grow from here, and I don't have to let it define where I move forward to either. I get, yeah.
It makes me
Absolutely.
think of consciousness in a sense, right? And vibration, because like the younger me and the evolving me put a lot of blame out there, right? Like blame myself for staying too long in a toxic relationship that had outgrown itself, right?
Yeah, yes.
And then so it went from self-blame to me like blaming the other person and like being very like, you know, you were fucked up and all this stuff, right? Like, and where the wrongs lied. And building a case, right? Like building a case of what that is. And to me, there was a lot of resentment and judgment and heaviness and all of that. And a feeling of like, you stole years of my life for me that I'll never get back, right? Kind of thing, through a manipulation almost.
Mm.
And then it evolved, right? It evolved to there being a kindness, like for whatever it is that occurred, and it was a time, and maybe that's a traumatic healing experience, right? Maybe it's a way to shift through that. But even just acknowledging how trauma shows up today, like I find myself being careful about the words that I share because I don't want to disparage another human being, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know if that any of that means anything to you, but
no, that's where I'm at. Before coming away on this trip, my parents came and stayed with me for a weekend, just to sort of, we didn't have any plans other than to spend time together and just talk out anything that needed talking out before I then went and explored the world and told the world via a podcast and book.
Yeah, right.
And one of the things, like my parents are very religious, and so one of the things that my dad said specifically was that he often prays for me that I will find forgiveness, because it's only through forgiveness that you can heal. And I have to admit that I don't know how to let go of the assigning of blame, and it's in both, like I blame myself for so much, as well as can clearly pinpoint things that I blame him for too, my ex. And I know it's not helpful to hold on to that for myself or for like against him, but I know I've still got a ways to go before I can see how to forgive and let that go. And it makes me think of Tori's song 29 Years from the latest album, and where the bridge, why is she so good at bridges? I don't know. She has a gift. But the bridge is like, walk with me in your bare feet, in the sugar sand, time to diffuse the bombs I planted in our bed. We can heal with forgiveness in the sugar sand, my friend. And I'm like, I've got to work towards that forgiveness. And for myself, I have so much complex energy directed towards myself as well, and I've got to figure that out too.
Yeah, I think I love what you're saying, and I'm resonating even with what your dad shared, right? Like healing comes through forgiveness, and finding the pathway to that is a meandering river, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's around the corner, you don't know what trigger will be there and what can open that up and bring it back. And then it's, I think, our job to return to kindness, right? It's our job to return to joy.
Absolutely. Like none of what I'm doing or exploring is meant to be maliciously aimed at my ex. Like, I'm not doing this to drag him down or anything. I'm trying to create a discussion about how these situations arise and how people can avoid being taken advantage of simply by, and like, for the people that do it and don't even realize that they're abusing someone, like, perhaps these discussions can highlight their own behavior to themselves.
No doubt.
Yeah, I just think the more we talk about the different ways that people inadvertently mistreat or actively mistreat each other, like, more of it can be avoided.
Where hurt people just continue to hurt people, right? Like,
yeah, it is a cycle, and I see that all the time, where just that trauma turns into inflicting trauma rather than trying to avoid it.
Yeah, it makes me think where Tori just says we're going to sit with this, right? We're going to sit with it. And rather than maybe diluting how we feel with, whatever, booze or whatever, or the next big rush or whatever, it's like, no, we're going to sit with this for a second and really acknowledge what's happened, to heal it, not to linger in it, but just to be like, wow, that happened. That was impactful, like that. There's an echo to that, even still today, that, can be felt. And I think that's can be where healing can happen, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My goodness, this has been an even better discussion than I anticipated.
Thank you. Same.
I'm really looking forward to talking with you more.
Sure.
For the book, but thank you for joining us for the podcast.
Of course, thank you.
But my songs,
yes, about 12.
yes, that was a bit of a tangent. But the first song that kind of came up was, it was quite unexpected, really. But it was a song called "I Still Love You" by Banks. It came out recently. Off the back of the discussions we were having, I think it's basically, the song is, I don't know where you go on Friday nights. I don't know, what you want in 20 years. I don't know, anything about you, but I still love you. It was incredibly touching to me and very difficult, because I think there's always going to be some kind of connection that you feel to someone who is no longer with you. And I think we talked about Flinch, the song by Alanis Morissette as well, 10 years. And somehow that person still has an impact on you, and you kind of have to let it. You can't kind of just pretend these things don't exist. And so it's just a very sweet, beautiful song about you're feeling the feelings and acknowledging them. Acknowledging how difficult it can be to separate from the little things in the person. And and then the other one was a song called Clouds. So, very your cloud. The song's called Clouds, Song for John. It's by Beth Ditto, and it was sort of my other touchstone song for my brother. I listened to it. There's a great line in it, which is, there's not a whole lot that I could do to get you off my mind. Not that I wanted to, not that I ever tried. And it's just that, that's, you get my point. It's very much my song for Kale. So I miss you, mate.
Yeah. The last one that sort of popped into my mind, actually, while we were talking about the native landowners and their removal from their land and that discussion, but then similarly tying in with the relationship element and coupling, is Imogen Heap's Hide and Seek. And I don't want to dissect it too much now on the podcast, but I really urge you to go and listen to it again with a sort of Indigenous person's perspective, in that, like, think about the song. Think about the song talking about the way colonization has happened and the forcible removal from people's native lands.
And from their culture, and from their families, and the sort of the dividing Canaan that kind of happened there, where, you know, it was like everything that makes these people what they are, we are going to wrest from them at every opportunity. And it's
But
yes,
it's not the first time that I've thought about that song in that sense. But it's also very much a song that I see as relating to my past relationship, and emotionally I've lent on it a lot too. So the fact that Your Cloud is simultaneously those two things, I thought it was a really nice pairing.
absolutely. I'm just thinking about it now, and that you know, sort of famous part of it that was sampled. You know, what is it? You know, what you say that you only meant well. Well, of course you did. Yeah, that it's all for the best. Well, of course it is. And that was those were the two things that people sort of use now. One of the big sort of barriers to saying to Sorry Day was, you know, well, people thought them, you know, people meant well, and people thought they were doing the right thing, and that's what was considered the best, you know, at that time, you know, and
But I love the way she sings, "They were here first."
Yeah.
Like, it's an undeniable fact.
Yeah, exactly. Has anyone spoken to Imogen about whether that's what the song is?
Yeah, it's this. I brought it up with someone a little while back, and they were like, "Oh, I'd never thought about that before." But for me, it so strongly
Actually,
speaks
now that I think about it,
of that colonization experience.
Yeah.
But it also can just be interpreted as relationship drama, and so I think it's really like a brilliant song. And yeah, I hate that sampled bit of it in that.
Jason Derulo.
Yeah.
You done fucked up Imogen.
In the bin. I know we have
only-
talked
yeah.
about not ratting on songs in the Tory canon, but I think we can go to town on
Different.
Jason Derulo.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the only. I'm still a bit sad that Imogen got wrapped up in JK's nonsense with Harry Potter, but I'm sure it was a great gig.
Right.
Imogen did all their music for Cursed Child.
Oh, of course. Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
Ooh, is it ever?
What's next for us?
What is next? Oh, we're getting into the meaty stuff. Our next episode will be I Can't See New York. Oh, wow. Which will be quite something.
Yeah.
And we'll reflect a lot on our time in New York and what that song means for us and our
will be an interesting time to almost revisit now. It's been a little while since we're in New York now, so it'll be interesting to revisit.
Yeah. But hopefully we'll get it out to you as soon as we can.
See you then.
And just when you thought the episode was over, here's the second part of the interview with Alexander, where we talk about Wednesday. And I know this is not the Wednesday episode, but it's a little sneak peek of what's to come later in the season. The other one you mentioned was Wednesday.
Yes, it was. And I don't know if I understand Wednesday. I don't know if I can get through the moments of silliness in the song to really get to what her meaning was. But for me, it's about noticing. It's about, you know, you're on your drive to work. Oh, maybe I'll stop for a coffee. And then you saw something that you wouldn't see because you changed your mind and got off the highway to get that coffee. And it's about noticing that thing. Now, does that work with all the other lyrics? I don't know. But there are moments of questioning and surprise and observation throughout the song that I'd be actually really interested to ask you, what do you think is the conflict with the man in that song?
You're going to have to wait till the Wednesday episode. I'll give you a little snippet because I do love teasers.
Yes.
But
Give it to the fans.
yeah. Yeah,
Wednesday for me was always just the fun, jaunty, like it's jazzy, it's fun. Like
Yeah.
I just didn't pay attention to any of it.
There's that twangy guitar.
Yeah, and then when it slows down in those moments, I was going to say chorus, but it's not really the chorus.
No.
It's kind of a post-chorus in a way. But they always frustrated me because I'm like, get back to the jazz. And I enjoyed it for that. And I knew all the words. I was singing along from beginning to end. And then I had this experience when I went to Perth for Perth Writers Festival in 2020. And I was feeling a lot. I was going through a bit of a interesting moment. And this experience led me to recognize I needed antidepressants. But
Congratulations.
Yay! Life is so much better now.
Yes, it is.
For some reason, when I was feeling really morose and like upset about my past, I thought, yeah, let's like press that bruise and put Scarlet's Walk on for beginning to end. And 3 tracks in here, I was listening to Wednesday thinking, oh, well, at least I can get through this one fine. And then I heard it and it clicked. And I had a full-on mental breakdown, like an emotional breakdown.
Wow.
I like was bawling for an hour solid. I had to call my partner Teague. He doesn't like talking on the phone because of his autism. So it was a struggle for him to be able to support me in that way. I was emotionally ruined for 2 solid days, including I had to literally dry my tears, go on stage to do my panel, and then step off stage and collapse again.
Yeah.
Twice, because I had 2 panels to get through, and one I was the moderator of because it was for my book, with the authors that wrote in my anthology. And then I thought I managed to sort of calm down a bit, and I woke up the next day and it all happened again. And I was so distraught that I'm like, I just have to go for a walk to deal with this. And I just walked and walked and walked for like an hour and a half, found myself in the Botanic Gardens, and then had another meltdown and didn't know how, I panicked and couldn't get home, couldn't get back to the hotel. And Teague honestly had to FaceTime me into an Uber and all the way back to the hotel because I just was inconsolable, because I finally understood Wednesday, and it described my life with my ex to a T, even the silly jaunty bits. Like everything is basically transposed from my life.
Well, now I need to listen to the song and
it'll
solve
be
the mystery.
It's the last episode of the season because it's the last girl we're visiting on our road trip.
Okay.
So, there you go. That'll hook you right to the end.
Yeah, nicely done.
Oh my goodness, Wednesday is a killer for me now, which is interesting because it's such a jaunty song.
Yeah, it'd be like somebody saying like, Happy Phantom wrecks me every time. I can't listen to it.
Well, Happy Phantom is quite, it packs a punch too, but not in the way that Wednesday does for me. Yay. So, thanks for joining us and talking about Scarlet's Walk.
Anytime.
Oh my God, I love this album so much.
Last perfect album that she released.
Hush your mouth.
No, everything is great, but there is nothing wrong with Scarlet.
There is
Front to back, it is a perfect album.
Yes. Although I do think that Ocean to Ocean, almost
it's right up
practically
there
flawless
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just such
How Glass is Made is rocky for me.
I love How Glass is Made.
I like it.
You're never going to please everyone.
No, of course not.
No. And that's not the point.
No.
No.
And I don't think I would love her as much as if she tried to.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen what happens when she tries to. Why can't Tori read?
Which is a brilliant work of art. Under fucking rated.
Oh, absolutely. I have the t-shirt.
I do need to get that t-shirt for myself. Yay! Thank you.
You're so welcome.
You'll
Yeah,
probably...
best of luck.
Thank you. We'll probably put that onto 3 different episodes.
Great. Stretch it out. Make that content.
The Michael's Walk podcast acknowledges that the journey they are undertaking takes place on the sacred and unceded nations of many proud Indigenous peoples. From the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, we are fortunate to call home, to each and every Native American tribe's land we'll set foot on as we travel. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and humbly acknowledge their sovereignty.